Many Americans have been discriminated against or stereotyped before, some more frequently than others, but very few realize the main cause of this. In an interview with Lila Abulagad, who has worked in women's issues in the Middle East for over 20 years, she points out that, contrary to many Americans' beliefs, the veils worn by Muslim women are not a sign of lack of agency, but rather a choice made by these individuals. However, this shows that there could be potential false perceptions of Muslims by Americans, which brings up the question: to what extent does media in America create false perceptions and stereotypes to the public of groups such as women, African Americans, and Muslims? Perceptions are ways of looking at someone or something. As you can see here in this picture, the two men are looking at the number from different angles, so they see two different numbers. Perceptions are also greatly influenced by one's personal experiences, as well as things that they see on a regular basis, and can sometimes lead to stereotypes, or a vague categorization of a group of people based on the characteristics of a small percentage of that group. A majority of stereotypes are typically bad. In addition, the media primarily consists of newspapers, online news websites, and TV news channels. According to Spyro Criosis, an executive associate dean at the College of Journalism and Communications, all had moderate credibility as rated by the public, or for the most part believed. Newspapers had the most credibility, closely followed by online news websites and then TV news channels. Some argue that the media creates accurate and positive views of these different groups, and that what they say about them is true. But in reality, the media creates false perceptions and stereotypes of women, African Americans, and Muslims. To begin, women are falsely portrayed by the media very frequently. This is particularly seen in sports media, where women are underrepresented or can be shown in sexual ways or as incompetent. According to Janet Fink, professor of sports management, only 10% of articles in the sample showed women athletes, compared to 9% showing male athletes, a very significant difference and obvious underrepresentation of women athletes. Don Lopiano, a lead advocate for gender equity in sports, points out that women athletes can also be shown with a lack of strength or skills at their respective sports, when many, including the U.S. women's soccer team, are actually some of the most highly skilled at their respective sports. Still, with limited coverage already, one would assume that these false perceptions would stick in the minds of viewers. The media also plays a large role in creating stereotypes of women. Agnes Barden points out that the most common stereotypes are women as housewives or victims, and they can also be shown as dependent on or inferior to men. However, these are very outdated and old-fashioned stereotypes, which very rarely apply in the modern day. Furthermore, African Americans are falsely portrayed by the media. One way is that they're shown as violent and criminal, or potentially even dangerous. Mary Beth Oliver, professor of media studies, says that 84% of African Americans were shown in violent rather than nonviolent crimes, compared to just 71% of whites being shown in violent rather than nonviolent crimes. A pretty big margin. Autumn Arnett, the editor of Education Draft, points out that oftentimes the stereotypical television news depicting African Americans as violent and criminal can lead to very negative attitudes towards them, and possibly even bias. African Americans are also shown as poor very frequently. According to Mark Fitzgerald, the editor of Editor and Publisher for 26 years, 65.2% of poor people shown by ABC, NBC, and CBS were African American. Only 29% of the poor people in America are actually African American. So this is obviously a very overrepresentation of African Americans as poor. However, the public will still believe this overrepresentation, will still believe these media portrayals, and think that a majority of African Americans are poor when in fact they aren't. By the same hand, Muslims are shown very negatively and inaccurately by the media. According to Saleh Mahmoud, the director of the Institute of Muslim Minority Affairs, Muslims can often be shown as very violent and fanatical people, while William McGowan, who has written for the New York Times, says that there was a lot of irresponsible coverage after 9/11, which a lot of writers and reporters did not carefully weigh their words and created several stereotypes, such as Muslims being violent or terrorists, when this is actually very false. Also, as you can see here in this graph, well, in the weeks following events such as 9/11 or the Boston Marathon bombing, in which Muslims were involved, they actually became positive after these events, but became significantly more negative than they were before, and often opened up a path for stereotyping and false perceptions. However, some still say that Muslims and these other groups are portrayed accurately, and that what is said about them is true. According to Eric Blake, a Charles A. Dana professor of political science, 28% of articles about Muslims had a positive tone, while 30% had a negative tone, a relatively equal scale of positive and negative articles about them. While it's true there is some positive news, it's actually very few in number for these different groups, and for specifically Muslims, a majority of people were reading more negative and inaccurate articles, because information from the most popular newspapers were typically more negative and biased and inaccurate, while the less popular ones, which were less read, were typically more positive, but a majority of the public's perceptions were still shaped by the more popular newspapers. So are the perceptions created, are they false or are they accurate? It's logical to say that the media creates false perceptions of women, African Americans, and Muslims. And there's research from several authors that shows this could create stereotyping, bias, and even discrimination towards them. But what can be done to solve this? Well, groups and organizations can carefully monitor media reports and advise them on what they're doing incorrectly. The Muslim Public Affairs Council is already putting this into effect, and they've been doing this effectively as they go around different media sources, advising them on how to create accurate and humanizing portrayals of Muslims. While they've been doing this well, this needs to be executed to a larger degree, and there will be other things holding these groups back as well, as it would be very time-consuming and a great deal of effort would be to reach out to all these sources and advise them on accurate portrayals. While the media may not even listen to what they tell them because they think what they're already saying is true and accurate, or they don't want to change what they've been doing for several years. However, it should become less time-consuming over the years because after a while, these groups and organizations have reached out to a majority of sources who will then pass on this information to new writers and reporters that they hire. While one would assume that the media would want the most accurate and positive information about those that they're covering, and not what they say to be biased or stereotypical. Overall, false perceptions need to end. Everyone wants to be treated equally and have an equal chance of success. And if these false perceptions lessen, then discrimination will decrease as well, and the media will more fairly represent everyone. So I encourage you all to make your own perceptions of others and not listen to what people tell you.
Aden, how did you handle the differing perspectives in order to reach a conclusion?
After doing much research, I realized that a majority of my articles, all except two, were showing that there were false perceptions created of these different groups. And when I had 6 perspectives total, and when 5 out of 6 were saying that there were false perceptions, I realized that that must be my conclusion. I must make that claim because there was overwhelming evidence that showed this. So I decided that my conclusion would be that there are false perceptions created because there was articles from several people, including Mary Beth Oliver, who pointed out a perspective that African Americans were falsely portrayed by the media as violent or criminal, or William McGowan, who pointed out that there was a lot of negative press towards Muslims, which portrayed them as violent and terrorists. So I decided that there is obviously false perceptions towards these groups.
What might be the real-world implications or consequences of your findings, and what are the implications to your community?
So a lot of people around the world, specifically in America, might be inspired to find out that they have been falsely portrayed, and may want to prove these stereotypes wrong, prove that they are not true. Others may take action, such as the solution of the groups and organizations, and may follow along with this plan and try to make more accurate portrayals of themselves and others around them. Also, in New Bedford and America as a whole, it's a very diverse city and America's a very diverse country where there's people from all different cultures and religions. And so a lot of people might be disappointed to find out that there's false perceptions of them created, and they might want to take action or prove these wrong.